At the family party, my brother announced, "You don't belong in this family." Mom stayed silent, clutching her glass. I forced a smile, grabbed my bag, and slipped out into the night. The next day, when the lights went out, 19 missed calls from home. I'm Emily Harper, 38 years old, and I never expected my own brother to betray me in front of everyone at a family party in Overland Park, Kansas. It was a warm summer evening, the kind where neighbors and relatives gathered in my parents' cozy suburban house to celebrate Dad's 65th birthday. I'd spent hours crafting a 3-layer vanilla cake piped with intricate buttercream swirls, a nod to my old days running a coffee shop. The living room hummed with chatterglasses, clinking kids running through the hall. I was carrying the cake from the kitchen, its sweet aroma filling the air when my brother, 5 years younger, stood up from the couch. His voice sliced through the noise like a blade. "Emily, you don't belong in this family." He set his eyes hard, not even glancing at the cake I'd poured my heart into. "We don't need you here." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I froze the cake heavy in my hands, my face burning under the weight of every gaze in the room. Mom sat at the dining table, clutching her wine glass so tight I thought it might crack, her lips pressed into a thin line, saying nothing. Dad at the head of the table mumbled something about calming down, but his voice was weak, barely audible over the sudden silence. The neighbor from next door shifted in her seat, her eyes darting between me and my brother. The couple from across the street, stiff and awkward, stared at their plates. Nobody spoke up, not a single guest. The air felt thick, suffocating, like I was drowning in their silence. My brother's words echoed in my head, each one sharper than the last. I set the cake down on the table, the buttercream smudging under my trembling fingers. I forced a smile, tight and brittle, and picked up my wine glass. The bitter taste matched the sting in my chest as I took a slow sip, buying time to steady myself. I wasn't going to let them see me break. They didn't deserve my tears. I set the glass down, grabbed my bag from the corner of the room, and walked toward the back door. Every step was deliberate, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the only sound in the house. I slipped out into the cool Kansas night, the door shutting softly behind me. My car was parked down the street, and I drove 10 miles to a motel off 69th Street, the neon sign flickering in the dark. My phone stayed silent in my bag. No calls, no texts, just the hum of the road. I didn't look back. All I knew was this: I was done being the one they pushed aside. They thought they could live without me. Fine. Let them try. But when the lights go out, the water stops, and the bills pile up, will they still feel so sure? I checked into the motel, the clerk barely glancing up as I handed over my card. The room was small, the air stale, but it was mine for the night. I dropped my bag on the bed, my chest tight with a mix of anger and clarity. They'd crossed a line, and I wasn't going back to being their doormat. My brother's voice, cold and final, played on repeat in my mind. Mom's silence hurt worse, her grip on that glass saying more than words ever could. Dad's weak attempt to smooth things over was just noise. They'd all made their choice, and now I was making mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cracked wallpaper, my hands still shaking from the weight of what had happened. 5 years of carrying their lives on my shoulders, and this was how they repaid me. I'd sold my coffee shop, my pride and joy, to keep their house afloat. $2,000 a month wired straight from my account, and they called me a burden. My brother's words weren't just a moment of anger, they were a truth they'd all been hiding. The party was supposed to be a celebration, but it turned into a wake for the family I thought I had. I didn't sleep that night. My mind churned, piecing together how I'd ended up here alone in a motel with nothing but a bag and a broken heart. I'd given everything to keep them standing, but they didn't see me. Not anymore. Maybe they never did. The thought twisted in my chest, sharp and cold, but it also lit a fire. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. They wanted a life without me. They'd get it. And they'd learn what that really meant when the consequences hit. My phone buzzed once, twice, as I lay on the stiff motel mattress. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I knew it was them, already starting to feel the edges of what they'd done. 19 missed calls would come later, but for now, I let the silence of the room wrap around me. I'd spent years keeping their world together, but tonight I was done. Tomorrow, I'd start unraveling the threads I'd tied myself to their lives with. They'd feel the weight soon enough, and I'd be ready for it. I closed my eyes, the hum of the motel's air conditioner drowning out the world outside. My brother's voice still lingered, but it was fading, replaced by a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I'd built a life once before, and I could do it again. This time, it would be for me. No more carrying their burdens, no more swallowing their insults. I'd given them everything, and they threw it back in my face. Let them figure out how to stand without me. I was done being invisible. I lay there, my bag still packed, knowing this was just the beginning. They'd pushed me out, but I'd show them I didn't need them either. This isn't just my story, it's for anyone who's felt invisible. Drop your city and time in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. If you've been pushed aside by family, you'll understand. Subscribe, hit the bell for part 2, where I cut every bill. Let's talk about standing up for yourself. I woke up in a motel room off 69th Street, the hum of a cheap air conditioner cutting through the silence. My phone sat face down on the nightstand, buzzing with texts I refused to read. I stared at the ceiling, my mind drifting back to 5 years ago when I sold my coffee shop to save their house. It wasn't just a business, it was my heart built from scratch, with early mornings grinding beans and late nights balancing books. Brides would come in glowing, asking for custom lattes for their big day. I loved every second, even when my hands were stained with espresso. That shop, Harper's Brew, was my pride. I'd saved for years to open it, pouring every dollar into a cozy space with wooden tables and chalkboard menus. Then Dad called one night, his voice heavy. Their house, the one I grew up in, was sinking under debt. Medical bills from Mom's heart surgery, a second mortgage, they were drowning. The roof leaked, the pipes groaned, and they couldn't keep up. I didn't hesitate. I sold the shop for $150,000, enough to clear their debts, fix the roof, and keep the lights on. I moved back into my childhood bedroom thinking it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. But temporary stretched into 5 years. I wired $2,000 a month from my account: electricity, water, internet, property taxes, even their streaming subscriptions. I took a job at a local nursery, arranging plants for half the pay I'd earned at my shop, just to keep cash flowing. Dad would nod a quiet thanks. Mom hugged me, her arms warm but fleeting. My brother, though, he changed. Tyler, who used to be my shadow, started treating me like I was in the way. Growing up, Tyler was my best friend. He'd trail behind me, his sneakers scuffing the pavement, begging to help me set up coffee stands for school fundraisers. "You're the coolest, Emily," he'd say, his eyes wide, grinning as we sneaked into the backyard to watch fireflies, whispering about his dreams of being a graphic designer. I taught him how to drive, covered for him when he stayed out too late at parties. We were a team. But when I moved back, that Tyler was gone. He'd roll his eyes when I entered the kitchen, mutter about me taking up space. Once he snapped at me for leaving a mug on the counter, saying I was a guest who'd overstayed. I brushed it off, thinking he was stressed, his freelance design gigs barely paid, and he was always chasing clients online. But the jabs kept coming, each one sharper. He'd blast music to drown out my voice when I tried to talk leave notes about chores I hadn't done. Last month, he told Mom loud enough for me to hear that I was freeloading, as if I wasn't the one keeping the house running. I tried to stay out of his way. I'd wake up at dawn, grab coffee at a diner before anyone stirred, walk the trails around Overland Park to give them space. Most nights, I ate dinner alone in my room, scrolling through old photos of Harper's Brew, missing the smell of fresh coffee. Mom and Dad didn't notice the tension. Dad spent his days in the garage fixing neighbors' lawnmowers for extra cash. Mom was busy with her book club, chatting about novels with the neighbor from next door. They leaned on my money but never asked how I was holding up. Tyler's coldness cut the deepest. The kid who used to beg for my advice now acted like I was an intruder. I'd catch him glaring when I paid the electric bill as if my help was an insult. 2 weeks ago, he left a note on the fridge. "Stop acting like you own this place." I didn't respond, just kept wiring the money, hoping he'd come around. But lying in that motel bed, I saw it clearly. I'd given up my independence, my dream to keep their lives intact. And they didn't care. My savings were nearly gone. The nursery job barely covered my own expenses, yet I was still pouring $2,000 a month into a house that didn't want me. The realization hit hard, like waking up from a long sleep. I'd been blind, thinking my sacrifices would earn their respect. Tyler's attitude wasn't just stress, it was resentment. He didn't see my help as love, he saw it as control. Mom and Dad, with their nods and hugs, were complicit, letting him treat me like I was nothing. I sat up, my chest tight but my mind sharp. I grabbed my laptop from my bag, the screen lighting up the dim room. I needed to see exactly how much I'd been carrying for them. Logging into my bank account, I scrolled through years of payments: electricity $300, water $100, internet $80, insurance $400, repairs, subscriptions, fees. It added up fast, draining the life I'd built. I closed the laptop, my hand steady now. An idea was forming, not out of anger but clarity. I wasn't going to keep enabling them. They'd taken my sacrifices for granted, and I was done. Tyler thought I didn't belong. Fine. I'd let them see what life was like without me. I lay back on the bed, the air conditioner's hum fading into the background. My phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to hear their excuses. Tomorrow, I'd head to Paul and Amber's house, my old friends who'd been there when I sold the shop. They'd help me figure out what came next. I thought back to the early days at Harper's Brew, when Tyler would sit at the counter sketching logos on napkins, asking for my feedback. That memory felt like a lie, now a ghost of a bond we'd lost. I'd spent years trying to hold on to that version of him, but he wasn't that kid anymore. None of them were the family I'd fought for. The weight of that truth settled in, heavy but freeing. I closed my eyes, ready to let go of the life I'd been clinging to for them. The motel room felt smaller as the night wore on, but my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't just walking away from their house, I was walking away from their expectations. They'd built their lives on my sacrifices, and I'd let them. No more. Tomorrow, I'd start cutting the ties that bound me to their world. They'd feel the consequences soon enough, and I'd be ready to face whatever came next. I wasn't sure what that would look like, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was choosing myself. I checked out of the motel by noon, my bag rattling in the trunk as I drove to Paul and Amber's house in a quiet Overland Park cul-de-sac. They'd been my lifeline since I sold the shop, always ready with coffee and a laugh. Their bungalow was a haven, a world away from the stale motel air. Paul opened the door before I could knock, his face creased with worry. "Emily, what happened?" he asked, pulling me inside. Amber was in the kitchen, setting out sandwiches, her eyes soft but searching. I sank into a chair at their dining table, the weight of the past night heavy in my chest. I didn't mention the cake or the wine, just the sting of my brother's words. How he'd stood up in front of everyone, his voice cold, saying I didn't belong. How Mom sat there, her silence louder than any shout, and Dad barely tried to intervene. "They think they're better off without me," I told Paul, my voice steady despite the ache. And no one stopped him. Amber reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Paul leaned back, his jaw tight, like he was piecing together a puzzle he'd seen before. "You know," Paul said after a moment, "sometimes people don't value what you do until it's gone. They need to feel the consequences to understand." His words hit like a spark. I'd been carrying their lives for years, and they'd taken it for granted. Amber nodded, pouring me a coffee. "Emily, what do they even do without your money?" she asked. The question landed harder than I expected. I'd never thought about it that way, not really. They'd built their world on my sacrifices, and I'd let them, thinking it was my duty. Sitting there with Paul and Amber looking at me like I deserved better, the truth became clear. My brother, Mom, Dad, they didn't see me as family, just a safety net. I'd given up my dream to keep their house running, and they'd pushed me out. Paul's words about consequences echoed in my mind. They wanted a life without me. They'd get it. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the dim kitchen light. My fingers moved before I could second-guess myself pulling up my bank account. Rows of automatic payments stared back at me. Electricity, $300 a month; water, $100; internet, $80; home insurance, $400; small repairs, streaming subscriptions, random fees. $2,000 a month drained from the savings I'd built pouring coffee and smiling through late nights. Paul glanced over, his nod subtle but firm, like he knew what was coming. Amber stayed quiet, her expression calm but resolute. My heart raced, but my hands were steady as I clicked into the payment settings. Electricity canceled. Water canceled. Internet gone. Insurance terminated. One by one, I cut every thread tying me to that house. Each click felt like shedding a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I wasn't angry anymore, just clearer than I'd been in years. They'd made their choice, and now I was making mine. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark. Paul clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. Amber offered their guest room, saying I could stay as long as I needed. I thanked them, my voice quieter but solid. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on my own ground. They'd pushed me out, but I wasn't running anymore. I'd given them everything: my business, my savings, my time, and they'd thrown it back in my face. Now they'd see what life looked like without me. My phone buzzed in my bag, a faint vibration I ignored. I wasn't ready for their voices, their excuses. I needed this clarity to hold because I knew the storm was coming. Paul poured another coffee, and we sat in silence for a moment, the weight of my decision settling in. I'd been their backbone for so long, and now I was pulling away. It wasn't about punishment, it was about survival. I'd spent years keeping their world together, but I'd lost myself in the process. Amber broke the silence, her voice gentle. "You've been carrying them too long, Emily. It's time to carry yourself." Her words sank in, solidifying the resolve I'd found in that motel room. I thought about the house I'd saved, the one I'd poured my life into. The electricity that kept their lights on, the water for their showers, the internet for Tyler's freelance gigs. All of it gone with a few clicks. I didn't feel guilt, just a strange relief, like I'd finally set down a load I'd carried too far. My brother's face flashed in my mind, not the kid who'd sketched logos, but the man who'd pushed me away. He'd learned soon enough what his words cost. I stayed at Paul and Amber's that night, their guest room, a small but welcome shelter. The walls were lined with photos of their kids, their travels, a life they'd built together. It reminded me of what I'd lost, not just the shop, but the chance to build something for myself. I'd given it all to a family that didn't see me, but now I was taking it back. My phone buzzed again, more insistent, but I let it sit. They'd feel the consequences soon, and I'd be ready for whatever came next. I lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling, the quiet of their house, a stark contrast to the motel's hum. My mind was clear, but my chest still ached, not from anger, but from the weight of what I'd done. Cutting those payments wasn't just about money, it was about cutting myself free. I'd spent years trying to hold on to a family that didn't want me. Now I was letting go. Tomorrow they'd start to feel it, and I'd be here standing my ground, ready for the fallout. 3 days later, I was sipping coffee at Paul and Amber's kitchen table when my phone lit up with Tyler's name. I let it ring, my stomach twisting as I braced for what was coming. When I finally answered, his voice was sharp-edged with panic. "Emily, what did you do? The internet's out. I can't submit my designs. Mom's freaking out about shut-off notices for electricity and water. Turn it all back on now." No greeting, no apology, just demands, like I was still their unpaid fixer. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone even. "You said I didn't belong, Tyler. This is what that looks like." He didn't miss a beat. "You're overreacting as usual. Just flip it back on and stop being dramatic." His words stung, but I wasn't surprised. He had a knack for twisting things, making me the problem. I could hear Mom in the background, her voice shaky, probably worrying about the fridge going dark. "It's not my job to keep your life running," I said. "You're 33. Figure it out." There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. "You're so selfish, Emily. This is why no one wants you around." He hung up. My hands didn't shake, but my chest burned. Amber glanced over from the counter, raising an eyebrow. "He's got some nerve," she said. Paul folded his newspaper, chuckling low. "Give it a few days, they'll feel it." I nodded, but Mom's voice lingered, unsteady, tugging at me. She hadn't defended me at the party, but she was still my mom. Was I punishing her too? I pushed the thought aside. They'd let Tyler speak for them. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. Mom's name flashed on the screen. Her voice was soft, pleading. "Emily, sweetheart, please. The house is falling apart. Tyler can't work without Wi-Fi, and Dad's repair orders are stuck. Can't you turn it back on? We're family." I closed my eyes, picturing her in the living room, probably wringing her hands like always when she was nervous. "Mom," I said, steady but firm. "Tyler said you'd be better off without me. You didn't disagree. I'm giving you what he wanted." There was a long silence. "He didn't mean it," she whispered. "You know how he gets. Please come home." I didn't answer right away. I thought of the years I'd spent tiptoeing around their house, wiring money, swallowing Tyler's insults, hoping for a shred of gratitude. "I'm not coming back," I said. "Not until Tyler owns what he said. You and Dad let him say it. You're all responsible." I hung up, my heart racing but my mind clear. Amber, who'd overheard, gave a small nod. "You're stronger than I'd be," she said. I didn't feel strong, just tired but focused. Tyler's call had been a jab, Mom's a plea, but neither changed the truth. They'd taken me for granted and I was done. That evening, Tyler called again, his voice louder, angrier. "You think this is a game, Emily? The neighbors are noticing." Susan came over, acting all concerned, but she's just nosy. "You're embarrassing us." I almost laughed. Embarrassing them. "After everything you embarrassed yourself," I said. "You wanted me gone. Now I'm gone. Handle your own bills." He exploded, calling me jealous, saying I'd always resented his freedom. I didn't bother listening. I ended the call and blocked his number. Paul walked in, catching the tail end, and gave a thumbs up. "About time," he said. I set the phone down, the weight of blocking Tyler settling in. It wasn't just a number, it was a line I'd drawn. Mom's plea stuck with me, her voice shaky, but she'd made her choice that night, sitting silent. They all had. The next morning, Mom left a voicemail, her voice quieter, almost desperate. "Emily, we can't keep up. The water bill's due, and Tyler's trying to borrow from Susan. Please just talk to us." I didn't call back. I wasn't ready for more excuses, more pleas that dodged the truth. Tyler had drawn the line, and Mom and Dad had let him. Now they were scrambling, and I wasn't going to swoop in. I stayed at Paul and Amber's, helping with dishes, chatting about their garden. Their home felt like shelter, a place where I wasn't invisible. But I knew the storm wasn't over. Tyler wouldn't let this go, and Mom's calls would keep coming. I braced myself for what was next, knowing I'd made the right choice no matter how heavy it felt. They'd wanted a life without me, and I was giving it to them. But how long would it take for them to realize what they'd lost? I didn't know, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I had my own life to rebuild, and I was just getting started. I sipped my coffee, staring out Paul and Amber's window at the quiet cul-de-sac. The neighbors across the street were out, probably whispering about my family's mess. I didn't care. I'd spent too long worrying about their world, their comfort. Now it was about me. Tyler's demands, Mom's pleas. They were noise, not solutions. They'd have to face the consequences without me stepping in. I was done being their safety net. The next few weeks would show them what that meant, and I'd be ready for whatever came next. 2 weeks later, a text from Susan, the neighbor next door, popped up on my phone. "Everything okay at your folks' place?" "Looks rough." I didn't reply, but I had to see it for myself. I borrowed Paul's car and drove by the old neighborhood not to visit, but to pick up a package I'd redirected to a nearby post office. As I turned onto their street, I saw the couple from across the street standing on their lawn heads, close, whispering. They stopped when they spotted my car, one of them waving awkwardly. I didn't wave back. Susan was out too, watering her garden, her eyes flicking toward my parents' house. The lawn was overgrown weeds choking the grass, the mailbox stuffed with envelopes spilling out. It was a mess, a far cry from the neat suburban home I'd kept running. I kept driving the image burning into my mind. My family's world was unraveling, and the neighborhood was watching. I didn't feel guilt, just a strange mix of sadness and resolve. They'd wanted me gone, and now they were seeing what that looked like. Back at Paul and Amber's, I was sorting through their old recipe books when the doorbell rang. Paul let Mom in. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse like a shield, her face drawn, no trace of her usual book club cheer. "Emily, we need to talk," she said, her voice low but urgent. I stayed seated, gesturing to the couch. "Sit, Mom," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, then perched on the edge, her eyes darting around like she was afraid to settle. "The bank's threatening to foreclose," she said, her words rushing out. "Tyler's working nights, but it's not enough. Your dad can't get repair orders without Wi-Fi. We're falling apart, Emily." Her hands twisted the purse strap, and for a moment I saw the woman who'd taught me to bake, not the one who'd stayed silent at the party. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said, choosing my words carefully, but Tyler said I didn't belong. "He needs to fix this." Her eyes widened. "He's your brother," she pleaded. "He's trying, but it's hard. Can't you help just until we're back on our feet?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Mom, I paid for that house for years. Bills, repairs, everything. Tyler pushed me out and you let him. I'm done carrying his mistakes." Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. "Your dad doesn't know what to do," she said softly. "He's worried." I wasn't surprised. Dad had always stayed on the sidelines, tinkering in his garage while the family frayed. "Then he can talk to Tyler," I said. "He started this." Mom stood, her shoulders sagging. "I thought family meant more to you," she said, then left without another word. Amber, who'd stayed quiet, squeezed my arm. "You did the right thing," she said. I nodded, but Mom's words lingered heavy like a stone. She hadn't defended me that night, but her plea tugged at old ties. I shook it off. They'd let Tyler draw the line, and I wasn't crossing it. I went back to the recipe books, focusing on the present, on the life I was trying to rebuild. But the image of that unkempt lawn, the stuffed mailbox, stayed with me, a reminder of what I'd walked away from. Later that week, Amber mentioned she'd heard from a mutual friend that Tyler had lost a big freelance contract. Without internet, he couldn't deliver designs for a startup he'd been pitching for months. The client moved on, and he was scrambling. I pictured him stressed, hunched over a laptop that wouldn't connect, his pride bruised. Part of me ached. He was still my brother. But then I remembered his coldness, his words at the party, unapologetic and sharp. He'd chosen this, not me. I didn't reach out. I had my own path to focus on. The neighborhood gossip was picking up. Susan had texted again, saying the couple across the street had mentioned Dad's unpaid repair invoices at a block party. My family was becoming the talk of the street, their perfect suburban image cracking. I didn't care about their reputation. I cared about moving forward. I'd started picking up extra shifts at the nursery, saving what I could. My savings were thin, but they were mine, not tied to a house that didn't want me. I wasn't going back, no matter how many pleas came my way. I knew the pressure was building. Tyler's lost contract was just the start, and Mom's visit wouldn't be the last. They were running out of time, and I wasn't going to bail them out. I'd spent too long being their safety net, and now I was building my own. Paul and Amber's house felt like a temporary home, a place to breathe while I figured out my next steps. But I wasn't naive. The storm was far from over, and I'd need to stay strong for what was coming. I sat at their dining table, staring at my phone, the screen dark now. No more calls since I'd blocked Tyler, but I knew Mom would try again. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, her excuses. I needed to hold on to this clarity, this sense of purpose. They'd made their choices, and I'd made mine. The next few weeks would test them, and I'd be watching from a distance, building a life where I wasn't invisible. I was done carrying their weight. Tyler's freelance gigs started falling apart without internet, or so I heard from Amber, who'd caught wind through a mutual friend. I didn't ask for details, I was too busy rebuilding my own life. Tyler had taken a night shift at a local supermarket stocking shelves under fluorescent lights, a far cry from his designer dreams. I could imagine him pushing a cart of canned goods, his jaw tight, pride bruised. Dad wasn't faring much better, his repair business stalled without Wi-Fi to get orders from neighbors. Their world was crumbling, and I wasn't stepping in. The gossip was spreading faster now. Eric and Danielle, the couple across the street, had posted about my parents' troubles on a neighborhood Facebook group, according to Amber. The post was vague but pointed something about hard times and an overgrown lawn. It was the kind of thing that turned heads in Overland Park, where neat yards were a point of pride. Susan had mentioned it too, her texts more frequent, laced with fake concern. I didn't respond. Their whispers didn't matter to me anymore. I was focused on my job at the nursery, arranging plants, saving every dollar. My shifts at the nursery were long but grounding. I'd spend hours potting ferns, my hands in dirt, feeling like I was planting something for myself again. The pay wasn't great, but it was mine, not wired to a house that didn't want me. I'd started sketching ideas for a new coffee shop. Nothing concrete, just dreams on paper. It felt good to think about my future, not theirs. Tyler's struggles, Dad's stalled repairs, the neighborhood's chatter. They were background noise. I wasn't their fixer anymore, and I wasn't going back. Amber kept me updated, not because I asked, but because she knew I'd hear it eventually. Tyler had lost another client, a big one, after missing a deadline. Without internet, he couldn't keep up with the demands of freelance design. He was working double shifts at the supermarket now, barely sleeping, according to her friend. Dad was borrowing tools from neighbors, trying to pick up cash jobs, but no one trusted his work without online reviews. Mom was quieter, staying out of her book club, probably embarrassed by the gossip. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a quiet resolve. They'd built their lives on my money, my sacrifices, and now they were facing the consequences. I thought about Tyler, the kid who'd sketched logos at my shop's counter, his dreams big and bright. That version of him was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a burden. I didn't hate him, but I didn't owe him either. Mom's silence at the party, Dad's weak words, they'd all chosen their side. I was choosing mine now. One evening, I drove by the house again, not planning to stop. The for sale sign was up. The paint chipped the lawn worse than before. It looked abandoned, a shell of the home I'd fought to save. I didn't feel pain, just a strange detachment. They were losing everything, and I was building something new. I'd saved enough for a deposit on a small condo, a place to start over. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I kept driving, leaving the house and its memories behind. Back at Paul and Amber's, I focused on the present. I helped Amber with her garden, chatted with Paul about his new business ideas. Their home was a reminder that support didn't have to come with strings. I was grateful for them, for the space they gave me to breathe. My phone stayed quiet now. No more voicemails from Mom, no texts from Susan. I'd blocked Tyler, and the others seemed to be giving up. They were feeling the weight, and I was letting them carry it. The neighborhood gossip had turned into a full-blown story. Amber showed me a screenshot of the Facebook group post now, with comments speculating about my family's fall from grace. It was petty, but it showed how fast things had unraveled. Tyler's supermarket job was a running joke, his designer image shattered. I didn't care about their judgment, I cared about moving forward. My nursery job was steady, and my sketches were piling up, each one a step towards something new. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to myself. I knew the worst was still coming for them. The bank wouldn't wait forever, and their rental apartment was probably next. But I wasn't going to step in. I'd spent years holding their world together, and they'd pushed me out. Now I was building my own piece by piece. The clarity I'd found that first night in the motel was still there, stronger now. They'd learn their lesson, or they wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my burden anymore. I was ready for whatever came next, and I wasn't looking back. 3 months after I cut the payments, the house I'd fought to save was gone. Susan texted me a photo of the for sale sign, the lawn still choked with weeds. I didn't reply. I heard through Amber that my family had sold the place, moving to a cramped one-bedroom rental on the edge of Overland Park, far from the neighborhood they'd called home for decades. The couple across the street had told everyone at a block party, their whispers turning my family's fall into local lore. I didn't go see them. I'd made my choice. I was building a new life. With what was left of my savings, I bought a modest one-bedroom condo in a quiet corner of Overland Park, near a park with walking trails. The walls were bare at first, but I started pinning up sketches of coffee shop designs, menus, layouts, dreams I hadn't touched since selling Harper's Brew. I took a job as a consultant for a local florist, helping with wedding arrangements and teaching bouquet workshops. It wasn't my old shop, but it felt like a step toward reclaiming myself. Every paycheck went into my own account, not someone else's bills. For the first time in years, I slept without the weight of their expectations pressing down. My days were simple: work at the nursery, consult for the florist, sketch at night. I'd walk the trails near my condo, the Kansas air, warm and familiar, clearing my head. My phone stayed quiet, no more voicemails from Mom, no texts from Susan. I'd blocked Tyler, and the others seemed to have given up. Their silence was a relief, a sign they were finally carrying their own weight. Amber kept me in the loop, though I didn't ask. Tyler was still at the supermarket working nights, his freelance dreams buried under the reality of long shifts. Dad's repair gigs had dried up completely. Neighbors didn't trust someone who couldn't pay his own bills. Mom stayed out of sight, avoiding her book club, probably too embarrassed to face the gossip. Their new rental was a far cry from the house I'd kept afloat, a small place with thin walls and no yard. They were starting over, and I wasn't part of it. I didn't feel triumph, just a steady calm. They'd built their lives on my sacrifices, and I'd let them, thinking it was what family did. But family doesn't push you out, doesn't let one voice speak for all. Tyler's words, Mom's silence, Dad's passivity, they'd shown me who they were. I didn't owe them my life anymore. I focused on my work, my sketches, my condo. Each step forward was mine, not tied to their needs. I was building something new, something that belonged to me. One evening, I sat at my kitchen counter sketching a new coffee shop logo, the kind Tyler used to doodle at my old shop. The memory didn't hurt anymore, it was just a fact, like the weather. I'd given them everything, and they'd thrown it away. Now they were living the life they'd chosen, and I was living mine. I didn't check on them, didn't ask Amber for updates. I didn't need to. Their world was no longer my responsibility, and that truth felt like freedom. The neighborhood gossip had faded, replaced by new stories, new dramas. Susan stopped texting, and the couple across the street moved on to other topics. My family's fall was old news now, a cautionary tale whispered at barbecues. I didn't care. I was too busy planting roots, literal ones at the nursery, figurative ones in my condo. My florist job was picking up, with more clients, booking consultations. I'd started saving for a small business loan, dreaming of a new shop, maybe a cafe this time. I walked by the old house one last time, not out of nostalgia, but because it was on my way to a client meeting. The for sale sign was gone, the windows dark, the lawn still a mess. It wasn't my home anymore, hadn't been for years. I kept walking, my steps light, my mind clear. They'd lost the house, but I'd gained myself. I didn't need their approval, their gratitude. I needed my own. And for the first time, I had it. Back at my condo, I pinned another sketch to the wall, a layout for a cozy cafe with big windows. It wasn't Harper's Brew, but it was a start. Paul and Amber checked in, bringing takeout or inviting me to their garden parties. Their support reminded me that family could be chosen, not just inherited. I was learning to stand alone, and it felt right. My phone stayed silent, and I let it. They'd made their bed, and I was done tucking them in. I sat in my new condo, a small one-bedroom in a quiet Overland Park corner, sipping coffee at my own counter. My phone was silent. No more calls, no texts. I'd blocked Mom and Dad's numbers just as I'd done with Tyler's. The quiet wasn't empty. It was peaceful, a space I'd carved for myself. I'd spent years holding their world together only to be pushed out. Now I was building my own, and it felt like home. My walls were covered with sketches, cafe layouts, flower arrangements, pieces of a future I was shaping. I'd stopped checking for updates about them. No more texts from Susan, no whispers from Amber about their struggles. I didn't need to know. They'd lost the house, moved to a rental, and faced the consequences of their choices. I didn't feel joy or regret, just calm. My life was mine now. My florist consulting job was growing, with clients booking me for weddings and events. I was saving for a new cafe, sketching logos at night, each one a step toward a dream I'd thought was lost. Looking back, I saw the lesson carved into every moment of this mess. Family isn't just blood, it's respect, mutual support, and seeing each other's sacrifices. I'd given everything to keep their world turning, but they didn't see me. Tyler's words, Mom's silence, Dad's passivity, they showed me who they were. I didn't hate them, but I didn't owe them either. Self-reliance became my foundation, the key to any bond worth keeping. Without it, love is just a word, empty and brittle. I'd learned that the hard way. This isn't about holding grudges, it's about survival. I'd poured my life into their house, my savings, my dreams, and they called me a burden. Cutting them off wasn't punishment, it was freedom. I blocked their numbers because I deserved a life where I wasn't invisible. They're rebuilding now in their own way, and I wish them no harm, but I'm done carrying their weight. My condo, my job, my sketches, they're mine, built from my own hands, not tied to their expectations. To anyone who's ever felt unseen by the people you'd give everything for, this is for you. Don't let your sacrifices break you. Set boundaries before you lose yourself, because no one else will do it for you. I waited too long thinking family meant carrying their load forever. It doesn't. It means mutual respect. And if that's missing, it's okay to walk away. I did, and I'm stronger for it. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and that's enough. Paul and Amber still check in, bringing takeout or inviting me to their garden parties. Their support showed me that family can be chosen, built on care, not obligation. My florist job keeps me busy, and my cafe plans are taking shape, maybe a small place with big windows serving coffee like I used to. I walk the trails near my condo, the Kansas air clearing my mind. I don't look back. They made their choices, and I made mine. I'm not invisible anymore, not to myself. The clarity I found that first night in the motel has stayed with me sharper now. I'd spent years trying to hold on to a family that didn't want me, but I let go. Blocking their numbers was the final step, a line I drew for my own peace. They've learned their lesson, or they haven't. It's not my burden anymore. I'm building a life where I matter, where my work, my dreams, my choices are enough. And that's a victory I'll carry forever. Thank you for listening to my story, for giving me your time and attention. It means more than I can say. I know some of you have felt this, carrying the weight for people who don't see you, only to be pushed aside. I see you, and I'm grateful you've followed me to the end. If this resonates, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a comment below. Share how you found your strength, what pushed you to set boundaries. Let's keep this conversation going. Your stories matter just like mine. Tell me where you're watching from, what time it is, and how you stood up for yourself. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us learning to value ourselves, no matter how hard it gets. Subscribe, hit the bell, and join this community. We're stronger together, and I can't wait to hear your voice in the comments. Thank you for being here.
I need employees who are more cooperative. My name is Jenna. I'm 34. And I'd been a project coordinator at Redline Dynamics in Seattle for 5 years. 5 years of handling client budgets, managing deadlines, and keeping my mouth shut when Gavin made his comments. He was my manager, and he thought that gave him certain privileges. The company was expanding into Las Vegas. New territory, new clients, new opportunities. I'd been hoping for a promotion, maybe team lead on the project. Instead, Gavin called me into his office on a Tuesday morning and told me about the business trip. "Just you and me," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We'll need to stay overnight, survey the market, meet with potential clients." He smiled that smile I'd learned to hate. "Hotels booked tight, though. Company budget, you know. We'll have to share a room." I stared at him. 5 years of his lingering glances, his comments about my clothes, his excuses to stand too close during meetings. I'd redirected every conversation, kept everything professional, told myself it wasn't worth making waves, but this was different. "That's not going to happen," I said. His smile faded. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I'm not sharing a hotel room with you." He sat forward, his voice dropping. "Jenna, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of this assignment. This is business, nothing more. Then we can get separate rooms. The budget doesn't allow for that. Then I'm not going." We stared at each other across his desk. I could see him processing this, calculating his next move. In 5 years, I'd never directly refused him anything. I'd deflected, sure, redirected, but never a flat no. "I see," he said finally. "Well, I suppose I'll have to reconsider your role on this project." I nodded and walked out. My hands were shaking, but I kept my face neutral. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on the quarterly reports. But I knew what was coming. The thing about men like Gavin is they don't handle rejection well. They especially don't handle it when it comes from women they think they own. I'd worked for him long enough to know he'd find a way to make me pay for embarrassing him. I just didn't think it would happen so fast. 2 days later, I got the call from Human Resources. I'd started at Redline Dynamics right out of graduate school. Master's degree in business administration, student loans up to my neck, and desperate for a steady paycheck. The company handled logistics coordination for manufacturing firms across the Pacific Northwest. Not glamorous work, but steady. Gavin hired me himself. He was department head then, charming during the interview process. Asked about my career goals, my 5-year plan. Made me feel like he saw potential in me. For the first year, everything was professional. He was a good boss, actually. Gave me challenging projects, backed me up when clients got difficult. The comments started gradually. Little things. "You look nice today, Jenna. That color really brings out your eyes." I told myself it was harmless. Office small talk. My dad had always said women in business needed thick skin. By year 3, it had escalated. He'd find excuses to touch my shoulder during meetings, stand too close when reviewing documents, ask about my dating life, my weekend plans. When I got engaged to my boyfriend David, Gavin's attitude shifted. He became cold, critical. My performance reviews suffered. The engagement didn't last. David and I broke up after 2 years, and somehow Gavin found out before I told anyone at work. His mood improved dramatically. The compliments returned. The lingering looks. He started inviting me to lunch, just the 2 of us. Business discussions, he called them. I developed strategies. Never worked late when he was still in the office. Always kept my door open during one-on-one meetings. Brought coffee from home instead of using the break room where he liked to corner people. I thought I was managing the situation. My coworkers noticed, but nobody said anything. Patricia from accounting would give me sympathetic looks during staff meetings. Jake from IT would position himself between Gavin and me at company events. But nobody talked about it openly. That's how these things work in small companies. Everyone knows, but nobody wants to be the one to speak up. I should have reported him years ago. I knew that. But I needed the job, and Gavin was well liked by upper management. He brought in clients, hit his targets, played golf with the company president. I was replaceable. He wasn't. The Vegas assignment was his boldest move yet. No witnesses, no office colleagues, just him and me in a hotel room 300 miles from home. When I refused, I saw something change in his expression. The mask slipped for just a second, and I saw what he really thought of me. Not an employee, not a professional, just something he'd been patient about acquiring. He'd been building toward this moment for months, maybe years. I'd just forced his hand. Thursday morning, 11:15 a.m. Sandra from Human Resources called my extension. "Jenna, could you come down to conference room B? We need to discuss your employment status." My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "I'll be right there." I saved my work, grabbed a notepad, and walked downstairs. Sandra was waiting with Gavin and someone I didn't recognize. A man in an expensive suit with a briefcase. "Please, sit down," Sandra said. Her voice was careful, rehearsed. "This is Robert Chen from our legal department." I sat, kept my hands folded, my expression neutral. "Jenna," Sandra continued, "we've received reports about interpersonal conflicts affecting your work performance, specifically issues with collaborative teamwork and responsiveness to management directives." I looked at Gavin. He was staring at his hands, playing the part of the reluctant manager forced to discipline a difficult employee. "I see," I said. "Could you be more specific about these reports?" The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Mr. Reed has documented several instances of insubordination and unprofessional behavior. Refusing work assignments, challenging management decisions, creating a hostile work environment." "Hostile work environment," I repeated. "Yes," Sandra said. "We take these matters very seriously. After careful consideration, we've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." I sat there for a moment, processing. 5 years of clean performance reviews, 5 years of hitting deadlines, managing difficult clients, covering for coworkers, and now I was the problem. "Your attitude problem is affecting the workplace," Gavin said, finally looking up. "We need employees who are more cooperative." Cooperative. There it was. "I understand," I said. "May I ask about severance?" The lawyer slid a document across the table. 2 weeks' pay, contingent on signing this non-disclosure agreement, standard practice. I scanned the document. Legal language about not disparaging the company, not discussing the circumstances of my termination, not pursuing legal action. They wanted my silence. "I'll need to review this with my own attorney," I said. Gavin's jaw tightened. "That's your right, of course, but the offer expires at close of business today." I nodded, stood up, and shook hands with Sandra. "Thank you for the opportunity to work here. I've learned a lot." I walked back to my desk, packed my personal items into a cardboard box, and left the building. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Didn't make a scene. Just walked out with my dignity intact. But sitting in my car in the parking lot, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not defeat. Not humiliation. Clarity. Gavin thought he'd won. Thought he'd silenced me, gotten rid of a problem employee who wouldn't play along. He had no idea what he'd actually done. He'd freed me from needing this job, and that changed everything. I drove home and made myself coffee. Then I sat at my kitchen table and started planning. I didn't sign their non-disclosure agreement. Instead, I called David's sister Lauren, who'd graduated law school 2 years earlier and worked for a firm downtown. She agreed to meet me for coffee Saturday morning. "They're trying to buy your silence," she said after reading the document. 2 weeks severance for 5 years of employment? That's insulting. What are my options? You could file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Sexual harassment, retaliation, wrongful termination. But you'd need documentation. Do you have anything in writing? I pulled out my phone and showed her the text messages. 3 months' worth of after-hours communications from Gavin. Invitations to dinner, comments about my appearance, increasingly bold suggestions about opportunities for advancement. Lauren's eyebrows went up. This is good. What about the Vegas trip? Any record of that conversation? I recorded it. She stared at me. You recorded your boss propositioning you? I started recording all our private meetings after he cornered me in the break room last month. I had a feeling something like this might happen. Lauren leaned back in her chair. Jenna, this is a solid case, but you need to know what you're getting into. Employment lawsuits can take years, and Redline Dynamics has money for good lawyers. I spent the weekend thinking about it. Monday morning, I called the EEOC and filed a formal complaint. They scheduled an interview for the following week. That's when Gavin made his biggest mistake. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. Jenna, this is Robert Chen from Redline Dynamics. I understand you've been in contact with outside legal counsel regarding your termination. That's correct. I want to be very clear about something. The non-disclosure agreement you refused to sign contained important protections for both parties. Without those protections, we may be forced to take a more aggressive stance regarding your employment termination. Meaning what exactly? Meaning we have documentation of performance issues dating back 2 years. Missed deadlines, client complaints, insubordination. If this matter proceeds to litigation, we'll be forced to present evidence that your termination was entirely justified and had nothing to do with any alleged harassment. I felt my stomach clench. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining the legal realities of your situation. The offer stands until end of business today. 2 weeks severance, mutual non-disclosure, clean separation. After today, any settlement discussions would necessarily be less favorable. He hung up before I could respond. I called Lauren immediately. They're threatening to fabricate performance issues if I don't drop the complaint. They can try, she said. But you have 5 years of performance reviews, right? Clean record? Up until this year. Gavin gave me 2 negative reviews after I started refusing his invitations. When exactly did those negative reviews start? I pulled up my email archives. March and June, right after I told him I wasn't interested in having dinner with him. Perfect. That's textbook retaliation. The timing alone proves your case. But when I went to my email the next morning, something was wrong. My work account had been deactivated, which was expected. But my personal emails from colleagues were gone. Messages I'd forwarded to my personal account, backup copies of documents, performance reviews I'd saved. Everything related to Redline Dynamics had vanished. I called my internet provider. There was a legal request for data removal. The technician told me. Court order. We had to comply. What court order? You'd need to contact the requesting party for details. I called Lauren in a panic. They've deleted everything. All my evidence. That's not possible. You can't just delete someone's personal emails. They did it. Somehow, they did it. Lauren was quiet for a long moment. Jenna, who exactly are we dealing with here? How big is this company? I looked up Redline Dynamics' corporate structure online. What I found made my blood run cold. Not just a logistics company. A subsidiary of a much larger defense contractor. Government connections. Military contracts. The kind of company that probably had lawyers who knew exactly how to make problems disappear. I spent 3 days in my apartment feeling defeated. Every avenue seemed blocked. My evidence was gone. My EEOC complaint looked weak without documentation, and Redline's lawyers had made it clear they'd fight dirty. But Wednesday evening, something unexpected happened. My doorbell rang. Patricia from accounting stood on my doorstep looking nervous. I hope you don't mind me coming by, she said. I got your address from the employee directory before they updated it. I invited her in, made coffee, and waited for her to speak. "I heard what happened," she said finally. "About the Vegas trip, about your termination. I wanted you to know you're not the first." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, there was another woman, Kelly Morrison. She worked in client relations. Same thing happened to her. Gavin made advances. She refused, and suddenly she was terminated for performance issues. What happened to her? She tried to fight it, filed complaints, hired a lawyer. The company buried her in legal motions until she ran out of money. She eventually took a settlement just to make it stop. Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. But she kept copies of everything. Every email, every performance review, every interaction with Gavin. When she heard through mutual friends what happened to you, she wanted you to have this. I stared at the flash drive. Why didn't she use this during her own case? She tried. But her lawyer said it wasn't enough without other witnesses. One woman's word against a department head. But 2 women? That's a pattern. Patricia leaned forward. There's something else. I've been keeping records too. Every time I've seen Gavin behave inappropriately, every conversation I've overheard, I never knew what to do with the information, but I couldn't just ignore what was happening. She handed me a manila folder. 5 years of documentation, dates, times, witnesses. I knew someone would eventually have the courage to speak up. I opened the folder and found pages of handwritten notes. Detailed accounts of Gavin's behavior toward female employees. Times he'd made inappropriate comments during meetings. Instances where he'd retaliated against women who rebuffed his advances. "Patricia, why are you doing this?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I have a daughter. She's 22, just starting her career. I don't want her to go through what you and Kelly went through. What I went through when I was younger." "Gavin harassed you too?" "Different time, different company, but the same story. I was young, needed the job, couldn't afford to fight back. I've regretted my silence every day for 20 years. That night, I called Kelly Morrison. Patricia had given me her number. "I wondered if someone would reach out eventually," Kelly said. "When I heard Gavin was still there, still in management, I knew it was only a matter of time before he tried this again. Will you help me? I've been waiting for someone to ask. My settlement included a non-disclosure clause, but it only applies to my own case. If you file a new complaint and I'm called as a witness, I can testify about patterns of behavior." "What about retaliation?" Kelly laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They already destroyed my career once. What else can they do to me?" The next morning, I called Lauren with the new evidence. This time her voice was different, confident. "This changes everything," she said. "Multiple victims, documented patterns, retaliation. They can delete your emails, but they can't make witnesses disappear." "What's our next move?" "We file an amended complaint, and we go public." Lauren introduced me to her firm's senior partner, a woman named Margaret Walsh who specialized in employment law. Margaret had silver hair and steel in her voice, the kind of lawyer corporations actually feared. "I've seen companies like Redline before," she told me during our first meeting. "Defense contractors with government connections think they're untouchable, but sexual harassment law doesn't care about your security clearance." We developed a strategy. First, file an amended EEOC complaint with Kelly's and Patricia's evidence. Second, reach out to local media. Margaret had contacts at the Seattle Times who covered workplace issues. Third, identify other potential victims through social media and professional networks. "The key is momentum," Margaret explained. "Once the first story breaks, other women will come forward. They always do." But we needed to move carefully. Redline had already demonstrated their willingness to play dirty, and we couldn't afford to give them ammunition. I spent the following week reaching out to former Redline employees through LinkedIn. Carefully worded messages asking about their experiences with management, whether they'd be willing to share their stories confidentially. The responses were revealing. 7 women over 6 years had left the company under circumstances involving Gavin. Not all were harassment cases, but several involved retaliation for rejecting his advances or reporting his behavior. One woman, Jessica Chen, had been fired after complaining about Gavin to Human Resources. Another, Stephanie Brooks, had been demoted and eventually forced out after refusing to attend client dinners where Gavin consistently made inappropriate comments. Most telling was a response from Sarah Williams, who'd worked as Gavin's assistant for 2 years. She'd never filed complaints because she needed the job to support her disabled mother, but she documented everything in a personal journal. "I kept detailed records because I knew someday someone would need proof," she wrote. "I just didn't have the financial stability to be that someone myself." By Friday, we had statements from 9 women spanning 6 years. Margaret filed the amended complaint Monday morning. Tuesday, the Seattle Times published their investigation. The headline read, "Defense Contractor Faces Multiple Harassment Allegations." The story laid out the pattern of behavior, the company's responses, and the broader implications for workplace culture in the defense industry. Redline's stock price dropped 12% by market close. Wednesday morning, my phone rang. Robert Chen again. "Miss Whitmore, I think we may have been hasty in our previous communications. My client is prepared to discuss a reasonable settlement that addresses your concerns." "What kind of settlement?" "Full salary compensation for 12 months, positive references, and a contribution to a women's workplace advocacy organization of your choosing, in exchange for standard non-disclosure terms." "What about the other women?" "That would need to be discussed separately." I hung up and called Margaret. "They're trying to isolate me from the group." Classic divide and conquer. They want to silence you before more women come forward. How many calls have you gotten from reporters? 15 since yesterday. Good. The pressure's working. Don't take any interviews yet, but let them know you're represented by counsel and considering all options. Thursday brought another development. The Department of Defense announced they were reviewing Redline's government contracts in light of the harassment allegations. For a company that derived 60% of its revenue from federal contracts, this was devastating. Friday afternoon, Margaret called with news. Redline's board of directors held an emergency meeting. Gavin Reed has been terminated, effective immediately. They've also agreed to establish a $10 million fund for workplace harassment prevention and victim compensation. What about the other women? They'll all be offered settlements based on their individual circumstances, and the company's agreed to independent oversight of their human resources practices for the next 5 years. I sat in my kitchen, staring out the window. 2 weeks ago, I'd been terminated for refusing to share a hotel room with my boss. Now he was the one out of a job. But there was still one more call I needed to make. Saturday evening, 7:30 p.m. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and my phone. I'd been thinking about this call for weeks, not because I wanted revenge exactly, but because there was someone who deserved to know the truth. Cynthia Reed answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" "Mr. Reed, this is Jenna Whitmore. I used to work for your husband at Redline Dynamics." Silence. Then, "I heard about the news stories." "I imagine you did. I'm calling because I thought you should know that this wasn't just about work. The harassment wasn't just professional misconduct." "What do you mean?" I took a breath. "He told me several times that his marriage was ending, that he was planning to leave you. He said you didn't understand him, that you'd grown apart. He used that as justification for pursuing other women." More silence. "He's been telling women for years that his marriage was basically over, that he was just waiting for the right time to file for divorce. I thought you should know that." "How many women?" "At least 9 that we've documented. Probably more." Cynthia was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder. "Thank you for calling. I need to ask you something. Do you have any evidence of him discussing our marriage with you or the other women?" text messages, voice recordings, and several of the other women received similar communications. Would you be willing to share those with my attorney? Of course. Good. Because I filed for separation this morning, and now I'm filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and emotional abuse. 3 months later, I started my new job at Brightcrest Analytics, a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Seattle. Better salary, better benefits, and a female CEO who'd specifically recruited me after reading about the Redline case. The settlement money allowed me to take my time finding the right position. I'd turned down several offers from larger companies that felt too much like my old job. I wanted something different, somewhere I could rebuild my career on my own terms. Gavin's divorce was finalized in February. Cynthia got the house, half his retirement fund, and full custody of their teenage daughter. The recordings I'd provided helped establish a pattern of deception and emotional manipulation that extended far beyond his workplace behavior. He moved to Phoenix and took a job with a small construction company. No management responsibilities, no female subordinates. His new employer had done their homework. Kelly Morrison reached out last month to tell me she'd been hired by a nonprofit that advocates for workplace harassment victims. She was using her settlement money to fund their legal assistance program. Patricia got promoted to accounting manager at Redline after Gavin's departure. The new department head was a woman who'd been brought in specifically to rebuild the company culture. I kept the flash drive Patricia had given me. Sometimes I'd look at it and remember how alone I'd felt that Tuesday morning when Human Resources called me downstairs. I'd thought I was fighting by myself against an entire system designed to protect men like Gavin. But I wasn't alone. None of us were. The women who came before me had been documenting, recording, and waiting for someone to take the first step. When I finally spoke up, they were ready. Sometimes justice takes time, but it's worth waiting for.